The lesson for today in church is about trials and tribulations and overcoming a lot of adversity. And I thought about this, and I'm going to talk to you this morning from a personal standpoint a little bit and tell you a couple of stories. Back when I was in college 100 years ago, I was deciding what I wanted to be, and I wasn't sure exactly what that was. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something important with my life. So I didn't think teaching was going to be it. And several things happened to change my mind, and one of them was a story that I was given by someone very important to me. And I want to tell you about that story. First of all, the story starts out over 150 years ago with a young lady that became a teacher. And she overcame a lot of adversity because she was an orphan. She was born into poverty. She overcame poverty, illnesses, and a disease that almost took her eyesight. And she graduated from the Perkins Institute for the Blind, and she had learned Braille because it was easier for her to read than straining her limited eyesight. She also learned what they called in those days finger spelling, which we today know as sign language, the language of communicating with the deaf. In her lifetime, she only had one student, but she became very important to that one student, and she stayed with that one student for 50 years. That teacher's name was Anne Sullivan, and I don't want to tell you much about her, but I do want to tell you about her student. Her student was Helen Keller. Helen was born in 1868. It's a long time ago, hundreds of years ago. And Helen was a normal baby, just like all of you when you were little. She was happy, she was bright, she learned how to talk a little bit when she was only 6 months old. She was walking by the time she was a year old. And then something happened when she was a year and a half old. She got a really bad illness and a big fever. And high fevers are very dangerous, especially in those days. And what happened was, when she recovered, a lot of people died from those illnesses in those days because there was no cure. Now we have cures for them, but not then. And when she recovered, they found out she was blind and deaf. Now, if you want to know what it's like to be blind and deaf, close your eyes real tight and put your hands over your ears real tight and see what it's like to be in total darkness and total silence. It's scary. If you want to know what it's like to be deaf, the next time you want to watch a TV show, turn the sound off. And that was like what it was like to be deaf. She couldn't hear any sounds, and she couldn't see anything. She couldn't see colors, she couldn't see the rainbow, she couldn't see flowers, she couldn't see anything. And she wanted to communicate with people. She wanted to tell people what she wanted, but she didn't know how. And she developed, by the time she was 7 years old, she developed 60 different symbols to show people what she wanted. Like, she went like this, and it meant go away. She went like this, come here. She went like this, she wanted something to eat. Different symbols like that. She had 60 of them. But she used to put her hands on people's faces and feel their lips moving, and she knew that they were doing something that she, communicating in a way that she couldn't, and she didn't know how. And that made her very frustrated. And when you get frustrated, you know, sometimes you act out. Well, she was starting to act out and not be such a nice girl. And her parents thought about maybe they needed to send her away to some place, but her mother didn't want to do that. So instead, they contacted the School for the Blind, and they got her Anne Sullivan as a teacher. And Anne took that little 7-year-old girl that she knew was really, really bright and had so much locked inside her that she didn't know how to get out. And she taught her the finger spelling, sign language, into her hand. She talked to her by spelling out words in her hand. And when Helen finally figured out that those words went with something, that they meant something, she wanted to know more. She wanted to know everything. And Anne taught her as much as she could. And Helen went to 3 different schools after that when she became a teenager, and learned and learned and learned. And when Helen was 18, she told Anne, "I want to go to college." Well, that was unthinkable in those days. For somebody who was blind and deaf to go to college. But she went to a preparatory school to prepare her for college. Not many girls went to college in those days, even if they could see and hear, but one that couldn't see or hear. But Anne went along with her as her teacher. And when she was 24 years old, Helen Keller graduated with high honors from Radcliffe College, which is a very, very prestigious school, very important school. And Helen went on to write books. Now she knew Braille. That's where blind people can read books by touching raised bumps. If you want to know what Braille feels like, the next time you're in an elevator, feel the bumps underneath the buttons, because that's how Braille people know what floor to get off on, how blind people communicate that way. She read everything she could in Braille. She learned how to work a Braille typewriter so she could write. And she dictated things to several secretaries to write books. She wrote 12 books in her lifetime and 3 different journals. That's 15 things in all. Whole books and stories. She wrote her first story when she was only 12. She was really, really, really bright. She learned finger spelling, she learned Braille, she learned how to type, and she learned lip reading. Now, a lot of deaf people lip read, but they do it by seeing how you make the words. Helen had to feel on people's lips how they made words, and she learned how to read their lips that way. And then she told Anne, "I want to learn to speak." And she figured out a way to do it between the 2 of them, where she could put her hands on people's mouth and nose and on their throat, because some sounds come from down here. And she could feel the sounds. And she learned how to talk. But because she couldn't hear the sounds, it wasn't very clear. And that was the one thing that she regretted all of her life, that the sounds that her speech was not that clear. And she felt bad about that. But she traveled all around the world. She lectured people by finger spelling into Anne, and then later on into another lady, and they would repeat what Helen wanted to say. She became an important lecturer for rights for people with disabilities. She also became a person who worked really hard for something that happened 100 years ago this year. She worked really hard to give women the right to vote. She also was the first blind, deaf person ever to graduate from college when she graduated from Radcliffe. She was an activist. She formed or helped form the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. She testified before Congress. She traveled the world speaking. Her books have been translated into many different languages. She was America's first Goodwill ambassador to Japan. She won 7 different honorary doctorate degrees from different universities all around the world, including Harvard and university here in the United States. She won the Theodore Roosevelt Distinguished Service Medal. She was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and she's a member of the Women's Hall of Fame. All of that from a person that was that at the age of a year and a half could not hear or see. She overcame all of those difficulties. So all the little struggles that we go through are nothing compared to the struggle and the disabilities that Helen Keller overcame and became one of the most important women in the 20th century. She lived until she was 88 years old. And a lot of her quotes have been printed in a lot of places. A few of my favorites are, "The world is full of suffering. It is also full of people overcoming suffering." And that's important. She also said, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. We can do anything we want to do if we stick to it long enough." And one of the ones I like the most is, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight and no vision." Helen Keller had vision, no sight, but vision. A vision of a better world, that she could make it, that she could help make. And she said, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. Because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." So whenever things start to get you down and you start to think things are too much for you and you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it, think of Helen Keller, who said, "I can do it." Thank you.